The mother Pikachu watched the egg lying deep in the leaf litter. It looked cold and trembled as a thin crack ran across the shell. She saw a push from inside and the crack widen. The shell split and a small Pikachu slipped out. Its fur was damp and its eyes blinked at the grey sky. She heard it breathe fast as it curled under a thin leaf. The baby tested the ground with tiny limbs. She crouched close, body low and ready. Rain came from the west, and the leaf litter darkened. The small Pikachu could not run far. Its fur was wet, and its muscles were slow. The cool night took heat from its body quickly. Because it moved slowly, it could not reach shelter before the cold set in. Rain grew harder, and the ground around the nest turned soft. The smallest hatchling smelled a raticate, and heard it circling the nearby roots. It watched the raticate's whiskers twitch as it searched. The hatchling shivered and squeaked, and pushed for space against the others. Each drop and every scratch of soil stole heat from its body, and cut the short hops it used to flee. The little Pikachu watched the mother shift and press her belly to the damp earth. It saw her tuck a hatchling into a hollow under her chest and scrape moss toward them to make a pocket. The Pikachu felt the warmth and edged closer. Its movement slowed to stay in the warm spot. She used her body to block the wind and to shield the hatchlings from the rain. She lifted and shifted them onto the moss pocket one by one, then flattened her body over the group to hold their heat. She watched them stay in a tight cluster and saw them make short runs to sheltered spots under fallen logs to find seeds and small invertebrates. They moved in quick low bursts and kept close to cover. The hatchling felt the heat under the mother and heard her small breaths slow. It found a soft seed and nibbled with small steady bites. It watched another hatchling catch a beetle between two runs and felt the other grow warmer as it chewed. The raticate nosed the edge of the nest, then drifted away when the scent of stronger shelter rose. For now, the group stayed in place and fed. Night was coming, the air growing colder, and rain might return. So she kept the hatchlings close and ready to move. She felt the chill and watched the light fall. She knew the young would learn the paths between moss, fallen logs, and clearings over days and weeks. Those paths would shape where they fed and where they sheltered. She saw a hoot-hoot on a high branch and heard its soft call as dusk grew darker. The sound reminded her that surviving here meant moving well and staying close. The meadow edge opened ahead, and the young Pikachu stepped into sunlight with quick, nervous feet. This place was different from the mossy understory. Visibility was better, and the wind carried every sound farther. He kept low to the ground and shortened his strides, watching where the trees met the grass. His siblings scattered a little, and the space between cover felt large. He understood immediately that speed and route choice mattered more here than before. It saw open meadow patches that left little cover and made even small Pikachu easy to see. It moved along the margins of those clearings. The danger was simple. A fast predator could cross the open ground and close the distance quickly. When it trotted a few paces into the sun, it scanned with its head and tested the air with its nose. It knew juveniles could not outrun a determined chase in a straight line. The open sight lines and the distance turned their bright fur into a liability. He watched pressure rise over days as patrols increased. Two Mightyena began checking the edges more often. The pack moved in steadily. They cut across low grass and tested routes that gave a clear run toward clusters of young Pikachu. Every time the juveniles left cover, he knew they risked a longer chase. Food patches that looked safe in the morning became risky by afternoon. His legs grew tired from longer escape runs. He felt the group slow and become more exposed. A small change began to help him. Narrow root burrows and thick undergrowth at the bases of trees gave short, reliable refuge. He saw a gap under a fallen root and remembered its shape after a single run. He heard Mother Pikachu call sometimes. She was no longer at the center. He had to learn the routes and the timing himself. Before each sprint, he lowered his chest and pulled his tail for balance. He moved in a rapid zigzag between patches of cover, keeping each burst short and aiming for the nearest root burrow or shrub. He watched the ground and picked the closest refuge. His legs pumped in quick angled steps to break a straight line and confuse a chaser. When he reached dense brush, he dropped low and slipped through stems into a narrow hole under a root that only a small body could fit. He understood this mix of erratic running and small refuges was the basic escape strategy for the group. The test came when a lone houndar lunged across a clearing after a sibling. He felt his breath shorten. His muscles tensed. He moved, made sharp turns, jumped short gaps, and finally dove under a root. The houndar skidded past the opening and could not follow into the tight space. Inside the burrow, his heart slowed and the scent of damp earth covered his fur. For now, the tactic worked. She watched the meadows and clearings shift with the weather, and she noticed patrols testing new routes. She saw the juveniles practice runs on every forage, memorizing paths as they ran, and each successful escape made those routes firmer in her mind. She understood the group had learned to move with the land. Ahead, she could see wider fields and faster threats, and she knew the next phase would demand quicker decisions and longer runs. The dry season had thinned the berry bushes and left more patches of hard, rocky ground. Pikachu walked with a heavier step than before. He had to cross wider clearings between food patches. Each hop took more effort. He felt the extra work in his hind legs and a weight in his tail. He knew his daily routes would have to change. He found fewer berries, so he had to travel farther and run for longer. Short bursts no longer worked, and distances became sustained movement across gravel and loose rock. He saw his paws slip on the stones, and he felt his breathing quicken after each run. Time spent moving burned the energy he needed to forage. He understood the visible problem. Food decline forced him into harder, longer travel. Pikachu kept his moves short. Longer movements made him tire and left him exposed on open ground. He saw a Linurn patrolling the scrub edge, with its nose low and quick. It was moving to pick up a tired scent. Pikachu felt it close by, his muscles tightening and his pulse speeding. The rocky clearing offered almost no cover. Each extra hop would bring him nearer to being seen. The danger pushed his body toward a different choice, or he would be caught. He began to notice small shifts in his body. His hind muscles felt fuller after long runs. The base of his tail grew denser and heavier under the skin. When he pushed off rocks, he felt steadier balance. The changes were subtle, but they let him try a longer hop and land without slipping. The test showed one clear thing. His body was preparing to do different work. Raichu noticed the change. His body widened, his hind limbs thickened, his ears and cheeks changed shape, and his tail thickened into a stronger, paddle-like form. He felt the new muscles and used them to make longer, sustained hops across the rocky patches. He used his tail as a counterbalance on steep runs and felt his wider feet grip loose stone. He began digging shallow scrapes for roots and turning over larger invertebrates he had not been able to handle before. The new form worked for now. He crossed a long stretch of jagged ground in fewer hops and without slipping. He found a dry stream bed and used a strong rear kick to dig a shallow scrape. He uncovered a tuber and a fat grub. He ate until his breathing slowed. Above him, a noctowl watched the clearing. He was larger now and moved with steadier power, slipping into denser brush before the bird could come down. The adaptation bought him time and food. He saw the landscape change. Rocks and dry ground did not give in. He noticed he now covered wider areas, and that came with new costs and benefits. He could reach food that lay farther away, but the longer paths meant more encounters and more strain. He moved toward a ridge as shadows lengthened, and the next stretch of terrain came into view. Raichu stepped out of the low trees into a sun-warmed rocky clearing. He felt the change in his body. His strides were longer, his tail heavier, his hind legs stronger. A low splash came from the stream below, and the air smelled of wet algae. He stopped, with his head low. He listened for anything that might turn those clear rocks into a trap. Open rock and shallow stream beds left him exposed. There were few shrubs to hide behind, and the bright open ground showed his broad shape. Near the water, he saw a Gyarados. It moved with slow, watchful ripples. He heard the water and watched those ripples. He understood they marked a predator ready to strike when something came too close. Every step he took could put him within reach. The ridge above was empty, then suddenly filled with movement when an Absol crossed the skyline. He knew predators used the high ground to scan the flats and the water for anything that moved. Raichu felt his breathing shorten as he ran farther than before. His hops came faster and his paws slipped once on wet stone. The ground was tiring his muscles. More predators appeared in the sky. He found a narrow dark crack in the rocks, barely wide enough to slip his shoulders through. The air in the crevice was cooler and smelled of moss. He tested the edge with his tail while balancing on a hind foot, then pressed the foot to check the hold. He understood. The crack could be an opening to use if a chase came from the water or the ridge. Raichu changed how he moved. He put his weight into longer, steady hops to cross the loose scree, and he used his tail as a counterweight when rocks tilted underfoot. A ripple in the stream told him Gyarados was turning toward the shore. He angled his run, dove into the crevice on his side, folded his body, and braced with his forepaws. The narrow gap stopped a fast chase and let him catch his breath. Inside the crevice, he waited and felt the patrol pass. He heard water splash. Heavy footsteps faded. A rough smell moved past. His heart rate slowed and his legs uncoiled under him. The plan held for now, and the rock kept him safe while the predators searched the open ground outside. Clouds built over the ridgeline and the distant wind shifted toward the stream. Raichu eased out on careful feet and noted the change. He mapped new lines of travel in his head. He planned longer hops, tighter routes, and more cracks to hide in. The landscape would keep testing him. The next move would come with the weather. Raichu moved along an old route that had guided it for months. The path was worn smooth by repeated hops between the same food patches. Tracks, chewed husks, and seed trails made a clear pattern. Raichu had seen how that predictability changed how other animals used the land. That morning, Raichu found deep prints cutting across the line it always took. Its muscles tightened. It understood one thing. The corridor was becoming shared ground. Raichu followed fixed feeding circuits because they gave steady food, but they also brought danger. It noticed larger territorial hunters learning where it fed and moved. Raichu saw Machoke marking stones and clearing routes near the river corridor. The presence of Machoke meant fights at feeding spots, pushes that damaged foraging places, and less time to eat. For Raichu, each force move cost energy and raised the risk of injury. The forager noticed the pressure increase as patrols grew regular and heavy. He watched a Domphon roll along low tracks and push through reed beds near water. He saw its weight flatten shallow burrows and smash seed beds. He understood that repeated Domphon crossings closed narrow escape routes and scattered the available food. One evening, he saw a Domphon trample the openings to the favorite feeding patch of the group. He noticed the group stopped more often. Food became harder to reach, and the time they could feed safely grew shorter. Raichu saw a small pattern that offered an opening. Where the ground had been trampled most, dense shrubs had formed angled gaps between the trunks. The gaps made short side corridors that could break a straight chase. Raichu noticed how the wind and the scent changed along those lines. Raichu began to time its movements and test the gaps. If Raichu left a few minutes later, a straight run could turn into a zigzag escape. One Raichu changed its timing and routes to avoid crowded patches. It left at dawn or in the late afternoon instead of at noon. It moved along angled shrub corridors to make side exits and quick pivots. When it stopped at a patch, it took fewer seeds and tucked some into cheek fur or tail fur to carry to other spots. It used its tail for balance to make sharp turns between trunks. It saw fewer animals clustered at the prime patches, and more activity spread across the plateau. The tactic worked for now. One morning, the Raichu saw a Machoke move toward the berry patch it had used the day before. The Raichu who arrived later kept to the edge, timed its move, and slipped through a low-angled corridor. Machoke charged the empty center and found only scattered leaves. The change in timing and the angled escape kept the animal and its food safe. That week, the Raichu had fewer confrontations, and it saw other Raichu start to copy the pattern. Donphan knew success was temporary. He watched predators adapt and routes shift with the seasons and floods. He still rolled the river edges and found new tracks that meant more pressure. He saw Raichu widen routes and plant seeds in unfamiliar places. He understood the plateau was still contested. He expected the next season would force more changes to keep routes safe and food moving. Raichu stopped at the ridge edge and looked out over empty plains. The air felt thin, and the ground dropped away in a single slope. The land would force long hops and a steady pace. He could see miles of sparse cover and a few dark shapes on the far horizon. His tail tightened. He knew one wrong move while crossing could lead to a chase. Raichu saw the wide open ground and felt exposed after long daily runs. He was tired and could not hide. He had learned that Tyranitar used these plains as a patrol route. The heavy tracks in the soil showed where it had walked and warned other predators. Raichu knew that crossing without shelter would make a direct pursuit more likely and could lead to a trap. He also knew the danger was not only speed. A single hit on hard ground could cause a serious injury. Raichu kept moving and looked for paths away from the obvious lines where Tyranitar favored travel. Wind picked up along the ridge, and a dark shape passed overhead and blocked the sun briefly. Raichu watched Garchomp move in short bursts of speed and stay on open ground to cut him off. Each burst forced Raichu to make a harder choice. He could run in a straight sprint and risk being outrun, or steer through rough ground and lose distance. The longer he stayed in the open, the hotter his muscles became and the shorter his breath. The plain had food, but every patch could be watched. Raichu found a narrow band of broken stone and a sunken stream bed that ran like a shallow groove across the plain. The path tightened toward a line of scrub and formed a banked channel for turning. Raichu tasted the air and felt the wind shift and chose the tighter line. The ground now favored quick changes of direction over straight speed. Raichu moved in steady, rhythmic hops. He felt his tail brace each banked turn and used it to push off rocky edges. He kept each hop long enough to cover ground and short enough to change direction quickly. When a chase started, he dropped into the stream bed and lowered his center of gravity. He used a sudden lateral burst to force a wide arc. The narrow terrain slowed the speed of his pursuers and revealed small crevices where his size and tail control gave him an advantage. Raichu watched Garchomp lose its lead on the broken channel and fall behind on the angled turns. He saw the predator give up where the ground tightened. Raichu reached a berry patch and paused, breathing shallowly with his tail on the ground. He ate and picked seeds into his fur and on his paws. The food restored some energy and kept him carrying seeds for now. Raichu watched the open plains and the patrols moving along the ridgelines. He heard distant rumbles and saw heavy tracks in the soil. He knew Tyranitar was still moving through the system. He finished a quick scan and checked the wind again. He planned the next long sweep toward the wooded corridors. He saw the landscape keep shifting and knew each new crossing would demand endurance, quick turns, and careful planning for narrow escapes.